So hello, and welcome to this session to discuss our point of view around change impact testing for SAP. My name is Don Jackson, and I'm a Chief Technologist here at Micro Focus. So here are the topics we plan to cover in this session today. First, what is change impact testing? We'll give a brief overview of the concept of change impact testing so we can ensure that we're all on the same page. Next, we'll talk about what is BPCA. We'll go over what is BPCA and how it's relevant to SAP. Next, we'll talk about what is a TBOM. TBOMs are required in SAP to enable BPCA, and we'll talk about the different types, their benefits, and their disadvantages. After that, we'll talk about dynamic TBOMs and the problem statement in that current way of working. The vast majority of customers which I've talked to don't utilize dynamic TBOMs, and we'll drill into the challenges that have prevented them from adopting a dynamic TBOM approach. After that, we're going to talk about a new approach that we've come up with to dynamic TBOMs. We'll go over the new approach that we've developed to overcome the challenges that we talk about in the previous bullet. Lastly, we'll have a summary. We'll summarize what we talked about today. So let's talk about the concept of change impact testing. Change impact testing is leveraging a change impact analysis to determine which tests need to be executed to verify the business functionality still works after a change to the system or application. And this requires that the business processes be traced to the tests, that you have that traceability between business process and test. A change impact analysis is analyzing the impact of changes made in features or modules of an application and identifying the corresponding business processes that correspond to those changes. Now, this part requires that your feature or your module or your application code has traceability to your business processes. For SAP specifically, there's a capability built into SAP Solution Manager to provide this change impact analysis, and that's called BPCA, or Business Process Change Analyzer. Now, that requires that your business process hierarchy is fully documented inside of SAP Solution Manager. And that's done inside of solution documentation within Solution Manager. Next, the technical objects of your application have to be mapped or traced to those documented business processes in SAP. This would be the T code, the transaction code associated with the BPH node, and it has to have a current TBOM associated with that as well. And that all enables BPCA. Lastly, the tests need to be mapped to the business processes as well so that you can know which tests to run. But what is BPCA? Let's drill down on that. BPCA stands for Business Process Change Analyzer, and it's a capability delivered as part of Solution Manager. BPCA provides change impact analysis for your BPH, allowing you to know which business processes are impacted by the change you're analyzing. The use cases for this, most common, are determining which customizations or custom code changes that you've made are impacted by a SP or service pack or an EHP enhancement pack that you're deploying in your environment. The next use case that we hear of the three that we hear most frequently is determining what's being impacted by the upgrade to the overall system. Lastly, you could also use it to estimate the time that it'll take to test those changes based on the previous runs of the associated tests. The benefits here are really about a faster time to market for your change by focusing your efforts only on what was impacted by your change, getting a precise and accurate representation of all the business processes being impacted, and lastly, but certainly not least, freeing up your costly human resources because they're not wasting time on business processes that aren't impacted by the change. And they can in turn now focus on building and modifying and working on business differentiating capabilities for your company. Now, when you're setting up to run a BPCA run, you have multiple types of analyses that you can perform. And those are, first, an SAP S/4HANA release upgrade, where you're doing a full SAP S/4HANA release. Next would be a support pack or a support package stack, where you're applying that support pack from SAP into your environment. Next would be an enhancement pack, or you're applying an enhancement pack that you've gotten from SAP. After that, you could also do a planned business function activation. And this is where there's some additional business functions inside of SAP that you want to turn on and activate. And you want to see if those are going to impact something that you're already using. The most common one that I see is for transport requests, which is interrogating a transport to find out what BPH nodes are impacted. You also, though, could do an object list where you specify the objects that are changing, which I would see most commonly being from a developer who provides that list of objects that they're changing before they've built a transport. And then lastly, you could also do a change transaction or a charm record for those customers who are utilizing charm. I find it useful to see a visual representation of processes because I'm a visual person. So here's a representation for the BPCA process. In order to enable the process to deliver accurate run results, you must first specify the BPH, including the T codes, the transaction codes or executables, and their associated TBOMs. Next, you run BPCA against the change as we described in the previous slide. BPCA will then interrogate that change and look for what objects are included inside that change. Then, BPCA will compare all of those identified objects in the change to the objects present across all of the TBOMs in the system, building a list of which TBOMs those objects in the change are impacting. Lastly, BPCA will then specify which BPCA nodes the TBOMs with objects in the change in the BPCA run results. Those BPCA run results will contain which BPH nodes and which T codes are impacted by the change being analyzed. So I've mentioned TBOMs a few times, but what really is a TBOM? So a TBOM is a technical bill of materials. It's a list of all the technical objects that are used when a business process is executed. The objects that are used by a business process differ from company to company based on the configuration and customizations that each company has done to each business process. As such, which objects get utilized in a business process will be unique per company. This means that each company must generate a TBOM that is unique to that company. Additionally, TBOMs are required to enable BPCA. But how do you create a TBOM? TBOMs can be generated using three different methods: static, semi-dynamic, and dynamic. Static TBOMs are TBOMs that are generated by the system analyzing the objects that are in the executable or T code. However, this method does not include objects that are dynamically called or those outside of the base executable. Given this, the precision of this method is low. There is an advantage for this method, though, that it's a background job. And that background job generates all of the TBOMs without any manual effort. The big disadvantage, though, is that low precision that we talked about. Due to this low precision, this method is not recommended to be used by SAP. The second method is semi-dynamic TBOMs, where the system utilizes production usage history to determine which objects are part of which executable. This requires, though, that you have at least 3 months of production history to analyze, so that you can get your month-end and your quarter-end closing processes included in that analysis. Since this is utilizing actual production usage information, the precision is far better than static. The big advantage of semi-dynamic TBOMs is that it's also a background job to generate all of the TBOMs, which requires no manual effort. The disadvantage of semi-dynamic TBOMs is that they don't include table keys or variants of the same executable. And this means that depending on your configuration and customizations, you may miss some or maybe a lot of your objects in your TBOMs. Furthermore, since it requires production history, when you're doing a system upgrade, for example, converting from ECC to S/4HANA, you can't leverage these until after your go live and your hypercare have both ended. And this brings us to our third method, dynamic TBOMs. This is where you have the system record the objects that are being called when the business process is actually being executed. Now, this method can capture the table keys. It can capture multiple variants of the same executable It can capture RFC connections to secondary systems and connections to third-party systems. Now, because of all of these capabilities, the precision is very precise, as it's capturing everything going on within the system during the business process execution. And that's exactly what the advantages of this method are. You get everything that's used when you're executing the transaction in the context of a specific business process. Now, the big disadvantage is that it requires a very high manual effort if you're not including this dynamic TBOM creation as part of your test execution, whether you're talking manual or automated. Furthermore, most companies can't test everything. Therefore, you're going to not have TBOMs for where you don't record them. So let's drill down a little further into dynamic TBOMs. Now, as we discussed, the main challenge, and this comes directly from SAP documentation, is a high manual effort if not combined with test execution, whether that's manual or automated. However, if you do couple that TBOM recording with test execution, especially with your automated tests, that manual effort is mitigated. Now, there are other challenges that you face if you want to use automated scripts to mitigate the manual efforts. Now, to be able to leverage TBOM recording capabilities, you have to have your tests stored, your automated tests stored, and they have to be executed by SAP Solution Manager's test suite. This means that if you're testing more than just SAP, that SAP is a subset of your overall applications, and there's a superset that you need to test, you have to do one of three things. First, you could configure test suite to handle all of your non-SAP assets. And you have to deal with the labor that it takes to configure SAP to be able to handle non-SAP assets. And you have to train all your users to use SAP Test Manager, Solution Manager Test Suite, because it's really designed for SAP experts. And the flow for non-SAP experts may be difficult for them to pick up. Your second option would be that you could store all of your SAP assets in Test Suite and your non-SAP assets in a different place. Then the problem with that is now you have to deal with reporting across two different systems and trying to normalize that data so that you can give proper statuses of what's going on. Your third option would be to store all of your SAP and non-SAP assets in a separate system and then duplicate those SAP assets into Test Suite. Now, the duplication means you also have to duplicate those assets as well, the automation assets, because you have to update your scripts to have your start and stop BPCA tracing in your automated tests for executing the TBOM. Now, duplicating your scripts means that you have to, when you do maintenance on your script and you have to update your script, you have to duplicate the cost of the maintenance of your script because you have to do it in two different places. Now, we at Micro Focus, back when we were Mercury Interactive, helped SAP develop the capability to have a non-ECAT system be the automation engine to provide this capability. So we have this capability already inside of UFT1. And that's the capability that our competitors leverage as well, that we help develop with SAP to have a non-SAP solution, non-ECAT solution, provide automation for that. And here's a video of how this would work inside of Solution Manager. So as you can see, we've got the business process hierarchy in there. And this process is going to show you how you can create a TBOM recording. So first, you have to have a test case inside of Test Suite. That test case, you then have to create a test configuration. That test configuration has to be tied to your business process hierarchy node. Then, the test configuration has to be added into a test package because test packages are what gets executed in SAP Solution Manager Test Suite. Then, you go to your test package and you do a run on that test package. And it brings you to the window that you see on your screen right now. Once on this screen, you then have to make sure that you click that checkbox that says Activate TBOM Recording. Additionally, that test case has to have been modified to have that start and stop BPCA tracing in the proper location for the TBOM creation for that specific T code. Then, once you do the execution, which we saw in the video just a minute ago, it will then launch the automation tool. Now, once you see the SAP GUI window show up is when the handoff from Solution Manager to UFT has occurred. In this case, and it's UFT1. Once that comes up, UFT1 is now doing its execution, which includes logging into Solution Manager, navigating to the T code, then starting the BPCA tracing, executing the T code, exiting the form after it finishes the execution, and then stopping the BPCA tracing, and then exiting the SAP GUI, logging off. Once it finishes that, it's now passed that data back into SAP Solution Manager. And SAP Solution Manager is now processing the TBOM, processing the test run, and the test results. Once you see the UFT result window come up, which is launched by Solution Manager because it's now stored in there, that's when the processing has finished. And as you can see on the screen, now we have a TBOM created for this particular T code on this business process hierarchy node. You can bring up details for the TBOM, and you can see that it's dynamic. And just like on any other TBOM, you can click on Show Content, and you can get details about the TBOM itself. And this is for all kinds of types of TBOMs, where it shows different information of the actual the technical components that are included in that TBOM. So we at Micro Focus think that there's a better way to handle dynamic TBOM creation than what we just showed you. And that process would be to leverage the TBOM work list item capabilities within SAP Solution Manager and use UFT1 or UFT Developer to drive that TBOM work item process. Now, what that would mean is you would have a start TBOM recording process, and that process is broken up into 3 sub-processes. The first of which is searching for the T code within the BPH to make sure that it's tied to that T code is actually tied to a BPH node. The next sub-process would be to create a TBOM work item for that T code. But the script should stop if the T code already has a current TBOM. The next sub-process would be actually launching the TBOM work item and starting the TBOM recording. Then you would execute your existing UFT1 or UFT Developer T code script that you already have in your test suite. And you would use your test runner of choice for that. Lastly, you have a process of stopping the TBOM recording. And that includes actually clicking on the Stop TBOM Recording and then updating the status of the TBOM and the TBOM work item to indicate that they're complete and current. Now, once again, as I stated before, I firmly believe that it helps to be able to visualize something. So here's what the process might look like. Now, the left-hand side represents the library of scripts that you already have by T code. And that's how you should be designing your scripts in a modular fashion and by T code. These could be in UFT1 or in UFT Developer or a combination of the two. In the middle of the screen, this represents the library, the TBOM library that we just talked about, which you'd have to build, which could also be automated using UFT1 and or UFT Developer. Now, just like any other modular scripting, you could combine those individual sub-processes into the main process that we talked about earlier if you wanted to. Just for openness and clarification, I chose to keep them separated so that you could see this working at a more granular level. Now, what you would do is you would have your test runner make calls out first with your start TBOM recording, then to your T-code script that's in your T-code library, and then the stop TBOM process. Now, that test runner that we talked about could be any test runner of your choice. That could be Jenkins, Azure DevOps, ALM Quality Center, business process testing, model-based testing, our new model-based testing solution, Value Edge Functional, ALM Octane, Test Batch Runner, or any other test runner that supports executing the UFT scripts, which includes any CLI or command line interface runner. Now, what I have here is a video of a script that I've wrote for the TBOM recording process start. And it's running directly in UFT1. Now, once again, you could have this run through your test runner of choice. But for the sake of openness, I've shown it directly in UFT1 so that you can see it more clearly. UFT1 is not running in minimize mode, as is the default when you use an external test runner. Now, as stated before, this could have been done in UFT Developer instead, or frankly, it could have been done in VUGen, Virtual User Generator. I also chose to leverage our AI capabilities for the NetWeaver and the Fiori steps that you see in the process to take advantage of the resiliency that AI provides. Now, if you want more details on AI, feel free to reach out to your local sales team, and we'll have one of our solution architects set up a meeting to discuss and show the AI capabilities in the UFT suite of tools. Now, the script has a data sheet column for the appropriate URLs, one for the credentials, one for the T code that needs to be used, and in this case, I chose to use C002 as the example T code. But the process would be the same regardless of the T code. The script would check to see if the T code is assigned to a BPH node. If it's not, it fails the script and reports that back out to the user. Now, you could modify the script to automatically assign the T code to the proper node if you wanted to. And you could parameterize that node name as well and pass both into the script. If the T code is assigned to a BPH node, the script then makes sure that the T code doesn't have a current TBOM. If it does have a current TBOM, the script stops and reports back as such, so you don't waste time trying to create a new TBOM for a T code that already has a current TBOM. If the script sees that it doesn't have a current TBOM, then it creates a new TBOM work item. During the TBOM work item creation, you have to specify the backend ID of the business process expert, which is what the system will use to log into SAP GUI to execute the T code. This also has been parameterized in the datasheet inside the script. Then the script makes sure that the system doesn't throw a status error when it generates the TBOM work item. When I was creating the script, I actually lost connectivity and got a weird error message. So I'm handling that error message in case that happens to you. Now, once the work item is created, the script captures the work item number, then closes those two windows and spawns a new one to go to the list. Since the TBOM work item list can have many open work items, the script applies a filter of the ID to be equal to the ID it just created. Then once the system has found that ID, it opens the work item, puts the work item into edit mode, then launches to TBOM creation. That spawns a new browser window that's really a download container for the SAP item that must be launched to start the recording. The script then launches the downloaded file, which spawns SAP Business Client, or what used to be called NetWeaver Business Client, which also brings up the Start Recording window. Once you click on the Start Recording window and the Start Recording button, it then brings up the SAP GUI window. So at that point, you would have your test runner execute the T code script, in this case C002, and then your stop TBOM script. The benefits of this new approach is that it doesn't require the use of Test Suite within Solution Manager, and the problems that we talked about around that are avoided. It provides a central location to track all of your TBOM work, so you can see how you're doing. How well are you doing at maintaining and creating TBOMs? It doesn't require a duplication of assets. So when you have to maintain those assets, you don't have to maintain them in two places either. It doesn't require that you modify your existing assets either, to add that start and stop BPCA tracing, because that step is actually abstracted out into the start and stop processes that we talked about. It's also test runner agnostic, like I talked about earlier. You could use Azure DevOps, you could use Jenkins, ALM Quality Center, model-based testing, you could use the BPT framework, test batch runner, or any other test runner that can do a CLI call. You don't have to shift to using Test Suite as your test runner. It's also script repository agnostic. So no matter where you're storing your UFT1 or UFT developer scripts, you can continue to do so. You're using Git? Great, continue to use Git. And you can do the same with the TBOM scripts. It can also benefit from our lifecycle tool capabilities. For example, in ALM Quality Center, we have a capability called RBQM, Risk-Based Quality Management. This functionality provides the ability to use a custom method for assessing risk on each requirement, and then using that information in conjunction with the BPCA run results to further refine your tests that you need to run. For example, if you have a BPH node identified as being changed, but it has no business impact if it were to stop functioning, do you need to take the time to test that functionality before the release, especially if you're in an emergency or an expedited release situation? You can use that RBQM capability to filter out what isn't critical to the business. Now, RBQM has the ability to have multiple factors that affect the risk assessment capability. Those things might be things like probability of failure, or business impact of failure, or likelihood of failure. Those are things that you can use to help you in your assess your risk, and it's customizable. Now, the last approach benefit that I see to this would be that you could incorporate this in the GCTS process, which GCTS is Git Enabled Change Transport System, which is what SAP has said how you do DevOps for SAP. As this method is adopted, as GCTS is adopted in the industry, you could continue to use this approach to do that as well and not have to figure out some way to cobble together using the old approach. So to summarize, using this new approach empowers you to be able to complete your change impact testing for SAP in your SAP environment. As I stated before, many of our customers have struggled in the past to be able to leverage BPCA because of the complications of trying to build dynamic TBOMs. We do still support that legacy way of creating TBOMs, that we actually worked with SAP to give the capability to have a third-party tool do that. However, this new approach solves the problems that we talked about that users were experiencing when trying to leverage dynamic TBOMs natively within SAP's Solution Manager test suite, specifically the duplication of assets and the modification of those duplicate assets. And it gets the benefit of being test runner and storage location agnostic. Now, you may say to yourself, this seems a little daunting. Well, this new approach already has an asset available for you that's provided by Micro Focus, by me personally, as a user-contributed solution. Now, just like any user-contributed solution, there's not a warranty or support to it. It's provided as an example, and it's solely intended to be an example to be leveraged by whomever would like to use it. So in other words, your mileage may vary. However, I firmly believe that you'll be able to get to 80 to maybe even 95% of the start process already scripted for you, where maybe all that you have to do is just change the data in the script, which is already abstracted out into the data parameters. You can use the QR code on the screen to get to that repository on GitHub, where you could clone it down or for your own use. And with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this session today and listening to our point of view around handling dynamic TBOMs to enable change impact testing in your SAP environment. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out to your local Micro Focus sales team, and they'll help you get answers to your questions. I hope you have a great rest of your day.